Colin Geddes. He can't be here for the Q&A, but please welcome back Mark Hartley. No, it's just Mark Hartley.
No, has anyone got any questions?
The prints that you used for the clips weren't always, obviously pristine. Right? Was that just an aesthetic decision you made, or was that because these were the only things that were available to you?
No, the question was, why do the clips look so wrong, basically? It was an aesthetic decision, no, not at all. Literally, we were very lucky with Not Quite Hollywood in the fact that the clips, we could find them all, and we could find the 35mm material for all of them. With this stuff, nothing existed of the Filipino films. We were lucky to, the people who owned these films only had pneumatics left of them. All the 35mm material had long gone. It had been shipped to labs somewhere because they didn't have money to do multiple internegs and things like that. With the Corman stuff, a lot of the time they couldn't find any of the material. They only had their old masters that they used when VHS first started. So we were really restricted by what people could give us. And maybe we should have made the interviews look a lot worse, and then you wouldn't have noticed it as much. But I guess a lot of the time that's how those films were being seen back in the the grindhouses and the drive-ins. They'd go from town to town. By the time you got them in the country somewhere, they'd been through the worst projectors in hell. So maybe it's an aesthetic decision to give you the true grindhouse experience. Did you buy that?
Hello. Whatever happened to Wang Wang?
Wang Wang ate bad crab and died.
Oh.
He had a heart attack after eating bad crab, and he was only in his mid-30s, something like that. I'm not an expert on Wang Wang, so but I know that's the end of the story of Wang Wang. Yeah, he didn't make a lot of money out of the films. He was obviously being used by the producers. He ended up going back and living a very humble life with his parents. Ate bad crab and died. That end.
You should. How many people here have seen the YouTube video of the Wang Wang rap? Have a look for, do a search for Wang Wang rap, and it is a music video with a great hip-hop track singing the praises of Wang Wang, and it's actually done by Toronto's very own Kate McLeod, so a local connection. Can you talk about seeing Joe Dante, seeing these guys so passionate about the films? I mean, John Landis. Well, how was it to get them to talk about those days? Like, no one talks to them much about that kind of dirty part of their careers in some respects. Especially, I mean, you're talking to the guys who cut the trailers. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I have to be honest here and say that I was a gun for hire on this project. It started off as a very, very different project, which was called The Search for Wang Wang, and it was all about trying to find Wang Wang. And as soon as I realised he'd eaten bad crab and died, I realised there wasn't much of a story to be told. If he had been living in the Filipino mountains like Hugh Hefner, that's a film. But so I kind of went away and said no initially to the producer, and then they said, look, we can get this funded with you. Is there anything else you'd like to do? And I always wanted to tell the kind of Corman New World story because I wanted to meet those guys. They were my film heroes growing up. I loved Joe Dante's films and John Landis' films and Alan Arkish and Steve Carver. So it was a real buzz for me to be talking to those people. And that was the reason I made the documentary, to be honest. And so I knew if I wanted to tell this story, I had to tell a story that included those guys. So, they cut the trailers. I thought, we set up at the start of the film that part of the whole reason exploitation exists is the selling of those films. So that was a large part of it. Hollywood Boulevard is a guilty pleasure that's in there. It shouldn't really be in there at all. It's not a Filipino film, but it was kind of finishing off the Corman, the era. And but yeah, talking to those people was really interesting because I don't think anyone had ever spoken about this stuff. And it's a story. It's the same on Not Quite Hollywood. When we tried to get the film financed, everyone said, "Who on earth is going to want to talk about these films?" And we discovered pretty much everyone because no one had ever spoken to them before. And in the same way that the filmmakers and the cast and crew we spoke to on Not Quite Hollywood had got it was their training ground, the exploitation films. The Filipino films were these guys' training ground as well. So no one had anything bad to say about them. Everyone's constantly saying they must hate this period, they must be bad memories. No, I mean, the actresses, they obviously had a bit of a culture shock going over there, but they didn't come out battle scarred. They all seem pretty normal on screen when you talk to them now.
Do we have any questions? It's very kind of blinded here and can't see a thing. Someone right up there in the corner. Hey, that looks like a hand. Yes.
Oh, John Landis is very, very candid in these interviews. How were you interviewing him, or how did you get him to be as open and possibly less tactful than maybe he could have been?
I honestly don't know. I hounded John Landis for a very, very long time. He was in the middle of shooting his first film in a long time, a film called Burke and Hare, which he was shooting in England. We shot him actually on the set of that. And he just worked a 23-hour day, walked straight off the set and came into our interview chair. So maybe it was through exhaustion that he didn't care what the fuck he was saying. I honestly don't know. And initially, I have to say, I didn't know that Landis knew anything about the Filipino period at all. I just wanted someone who was a respectable and well-known genre filmmaker to give us an introduction to what exploitation films are. I was just going to use them at the very start of the documentary. But then I sort of said, is there anything you'd like to talk about in terms of the films that we're going to feature in the documentary? And off he went. I couldn't shut him up. So I think that, I'm not sure if he's too, I think some of what he says is tongue-in-cheek. I honestly don't know. I don't think anything he says is outrageously wrong. I mean, I think Roger Corman has got a reputation of being a penny-pinching guy who gave a lot of people breaks. And some people can look at that as exploitation. Corman is going to see it in a week's time, so it's going to be very interesting to see what he makes of it.
Around 2 years ago, I had a call which was like put into when I was at home screening films, and it was like, we have John Landis on the phone. He's got a documentary about Don Rickles that he wants to talk to you about. And it was like totally unexpected. And then it was like an hour of just talking about films. And he was just incredibly candid. But the interesting thing about him, in his emails, he always signs off his emails, onwards and upwards with the arts. Yes?
Have you considered making any other exploitation documentaries about other countries, like Canada, for example? I mean, I always thought movies like the Cube movies, the Ginger Snap movies...
Come on, one of us can do that film. A Canadian's got to do that film, not an Aussie. What are you saying?
That is actually what I was about to say. You make your own documentaries. Honestly, I never set out to be a documentary filmmaker, and if you talk to any other real documentary filmmakers, they'll be quite ashamed of the work I do, obviously, I think. So I really, the first one happened by accident, this one happened because I was broke. And I honestly, look, if I was going to do one more film documentary to complete the trilogy, I'm very keen to tell the story of Canon Films, The Golden Glotus. I think that's one hell of a story. But no, I think there's a lot of fine Canadian filmmakers who have a much better grasp on what's important in Canadian genre films, and I certainly do. There's a great book on Canadian exploitation films. What's that called?
They Came From Within.
They Came From Within, yeah. So all someone needs to do is start highlighting that book, and there's a documentary there.
And actually about one of the people that you interviewed, Pete Toombs. Pete Toombs has written an amazing book called Manuel Cabral, which is just about weird, wild world cinema, and it came out a number of years ago, but you can still find it usually in like discount and delete bins, like run over to BMV. I'm sure they've got a couple of copies over there. Anyone else?
There was one thing I did remember about Landis, and that was before the interview, he kept on saying to me constantly, what am I going to talk about? What are you going to ask me? What are you going to ask me? And so I just kept on talking to him about things that I wanted to talk to him about that had nothing to do with this conversation at all. So that when he sat inside in the chair, everything I fired at him, he didn't have time to prepare it all. And I think maybe that's why he was a little bit more candid than if I had have given him a list of questions beforehand. I don't know, look, I came away from the Landis thing going, I've kind of found my surrogate Tarantino, because everyone walked away from Not Quite Hollywood talking about Tarantino, and I figured I need someone who can at least be that entertaining, and I think Landis is the surrogate Tarantino in this film.
I'm glad you covered the early part of the Filipino before Corman, because there showed that there was other going on. But there's an actor from my own town, from Pennsylvania, who's Richard Derr, who was the male hero in Derr is a Man.
Right.
So there was more.
Look, there was obviously stuff made before there. Fred Roos was over there making films with Monty Hellman before that. And
Yeah, Jack Nicholson.
yeah, with Jack Nicholson. But we had to find a start and a stop period. Otherwise, where do these things end? Yeah, it's kind of a strange mix, this film, because in a way, people know absolutely nothing about this period really, and it's a really difficult balance of how much information you give before you can tell the funny stories. So I mean, I don't know if you got it right, but hopefully there's some entertainment value there.
Anyone else? Can't see anything. Let me ask you. So you were saying that no one really had anything bad to say about Corman. There's a scene in the film where he's like, "Where are people getting these stories from?" So everyone was pretty candid about him. How did he react? Was there any kind of more reaction aside from what you got on camera about, or what did you relate to him that people were saying?
Look, Roger Corman was very difficult to get for this film. I literally set my alarm clock in Australia at 3 o'clock every morning. I'd get up and ring the New World office. Sorry, he's in a meeting. Okay, I'll ring back in 2 hours. Go to bed, set the alarm clock again. And after 5 days of doing that, they basically felt sorry for me and said, "We found some time for you." But he was very difficult. And I guess he's a guy, he's in his 80s now, he's got some kind of legacy that he's trying to leave and protect. And it was interesting, when I was interviewing him, he would start answering a question, stop, rethink, restart, stop, rethink, until he got his answers exactly right to what he wanted to say. So he's quite thoughtful and reserved about that. And I would quote things that I had read or that 12 interviews had told me, and whether he wouldn't admit to them or he couldn't remember them, I don't know, but he would keep on saying, where is this stuff coming from? On numerous occasions. Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm keen to hear about, there's a Corman documentary coming out which they talk to pretty much anyone who's ever worked with him, and I'm keen to know how candid he is in that, if he appears in it, obviously.
Yeah. There was, shouldn't have asked me that. There was a documentary we did see about Roger Corman, but it wasn't ready in time. And he's actually pretty candid in that, but the interviews that they had with him, they actually have Jack Nicholson at the end of his interview, like throughout the documentary. Jack Nicholson keeps on talking about how Roger Corman supported him when he had nothing and would give him these roles when he was just an up-and-comer. And at the end of the interview, Nicholson starts crying. And it's like, it's incredible, but it lacked the panache and rhythm of your film, let me tell you, sir.
We desperately tried to get Pam Grier and Jonathan Demme, and part of the excuse we got, they just spoke to some people about Corman, So, they better do it. But we got the cinema on the screen first. Yeah. Stole their thunder. Do not support the other Corman documentary.
All right, do I have one other question? Anyone at all? All right, let's, okay, yes.
I was just wondering if you can explain why you made this film. Like, what is it about this relatively obscure subject matter or period in time that appeals to you?
Yeah, why? I thought I explained that earlier. I just wanted to meet John Landis and Alan Arkish and Joe Dante and Steve Carver. Seriously, that was it. I hadn't even seen any of these films. It's true. When they asked me to do this, I didn't know anything at all about this period, and I went and did one day's research. Well, research. I got on the net and basically discovered that I knew that women in prison films, but I didn't realise that they'd been made when the country was under martial law, and there was this really strict regime. And I thought, that's a good take. You know, there's a good kind of story there about this country not letting its own filmmakers make any kind of films about revolution, whereas there's Sid Haig over there breaking women out of, you know, prison. So that was kind of the very thin premise that I flew the whole documentary on. But quite honestly, it was an excuse to pay my electricity bill and meet these people. And I'm sure that possibly if a Filipino had made it, it'd be a very, very different story.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thanks.